Thank you, Director Haynes. I also want to thank Director Burns, Director Haynes, Director Wray, and of course, former Director of NSA, Nakasone, for your assistance in the process that this committee undertook in drafting our 702 reforms bill and reauthorization. The reforms that are in that bill, this committee worked very diligently, responding to each of the areas where we found abuses, this bill not only continues the ability for the intelligence community to collect intelligence on foreigners abroad, not American citizens, foreigners abroad, it also addresses the concerns that we had and the concerns that have been part of the public discussion in Congress of abuses, and I appreciate the fact that you have not only cooperated with us, but you've assisted us in the overall process of drafting that and in our advocacy for it. Director Wray, you have been very public over the past several months, and including yesterday in the worldwide threats hearing in front of the Senate, on warning of a potential terrorist attack occurring in the United States. The intelligence that we see is clear, and I appreciate that you have publicly entered into the discussion of the threat and the concern that we are currently facing. People who want to do America harm have entered our country illegally and are here. Now, you have continued to cite that warning, and I'd like your comments on, you believe that we are at a significant risk right now here from the possibility of a terrorist attack.
I believe that the terrorist threat level that we're contending with right now is at a whole nother level from an already heightened terrorist threat level that we were seeing even before October 7th. And I say that for a variety of reasons. First, you've seen a veritable rogues gallery of foreign terrorist organizations calling for terrorist attacks against us in a way that we haven't seen in a long, long time. And these are terrorist organizations, as this committee knows very well, which often don't see eye to eye on much, but they seem to see eye to eye on this. I would add to that that we are very concerned about the risk of inspired attacks, lone actors here, inspired by some of those same calls for violence from over in the Middle East. And so this is a time not for panic, but for heightened vigilance given the risk.
Director, I'm going to ask you a couple questions about the FBI's role in designating individuals as known terrorists, suspected terrorists, and on the no-fly list. When there are concerns that an individual might be affiliated with a terrorist organization or have the intent to undertake a terrorist attack, there are designated categories: known terrorists, suspected terrorists, no-fly list, and selectee. Could you describe the FBI's role in those designations?
So the FBI maintains the so-called terrorist watch list, the known or suspected terrorist list, based on information that comes from a variety of sources. That could come from FBI investigative work, but very often it comes from information from our intelligence partners or from other sources, other agencies. And so that's when the so-called DROG, the derogatory information about the individual, puts them on the list. And then armed with that list, that's what allows us to engage with DHS as they're running names when they come in.
Who designates someone on the no-fly list?
Well, the difference between the no-fly list and the selectee list, I guess I would say, is there are both individuals who, based on the list, don't fly or shouldn't fly, and then there are those who are identified for heightened screening. And it's an interagency process that determines who's in which category.
What's the FBI's role in that?
Well, the FBI contributes its own threat intelligence and obviously maintains the watch list itself.
And the no-fly list is maintained by the FBI?
That's my understanding.
Have any individuals who are known terrorists, suspected terrorists, or who on the no-fly list presented themselves at the southern border or been apprehended at the southern border, crossing illegally into the United States?
We have seen over the last, I think, 5 years, an increase in the number of KSTs, or known or suspected terrorists, attempting to cross the southern border.
Have individuals on the known terrorist list, suspected terrorist list, or the no-fly list presented themselves at U.S. airports once entering the United States, attempting to fly?
I believe the answer to that is yes as well, although I don't have that right in front of me at the moment.
Have they flown?
Well, there may have been instances where, as part of an investigation in close coordination, in order to be able to then potentially apprehend somebody, somebody's allowed to fly in order to see where they're going, in order to then take action, but not intentionally.
Have individuals on the no-fly list been permitted to fly?
I believe, again, depends on what time period you're talking about, but I believe there have been individuals where, in coordination between investigators and other agencies, an individual that we want to see where they're going and be able to potentially arrest them, that there may have been situations where somebody's been allowed to fly in that kind of situation.
Does the FBI have a role if someone presents themselves at an U.S. airport with the intent to fly that is on the no-fly list? Is the FBI involved in permitting them to fly or downgrading their status for them to fly?
No. We provide information to the agency, the DHS agency that's involved at the airport screening, but the decision to allow them to fly is not ours.
Are you notified if someone from the no-fly list shows up and wants to fly?
Certainly, that's most of the time, that's my understanding, yes.
Great. Thank you. Director Burns, Director Haynes, Ukraine is a significant issue for the United States, as we are unfortunately in a position where we are caught up in a legislative process that has not yet resolved the issue of continued U.S. support for Ukraine as they struggle on the battlefield against Russian aggression. Director Burns, there are still individuals who claim that this war, this aggression by Russia, where they've invaded Ukraine, is about Russia wanting to prevent Ukraine from being in NATO, or perhaps even that Russia instigated this incursion by Russia, or that Russia itself is trying to counter NATO in Ukraine. This conflict's much more than that, isn't it, Director Burns? Help us understand this conflict. You've served as the U.S. ambassador to Russia. You know Putin well. You see the intelligence. You have been active in working with Ukraine and this administration on this issue. What is this conflict about, and what is Putin seeking in Ukraine?
I think what Vladimir Putin seeks, what caused him to launch his brutal and unprovoked invasion about 2 years ago, was his fixation on subjugating Ukraine and controlling its choices, much broader than the issue of NATO. I think Putin, and I've heard him say this many times in the past, believes that Ukraine isn't a real country, that it's weak and divided, and what Ukrainians have done is demonstrate the real countries fight back. And so I think there's a great deal at stake today in the supplemental assistance that the Congress is considering. There's a great deal at stake, not only for Ukrainians and European security, for our long-term interests around the globe, including in the Indo-Pacific.
Dr. Burns, do Ukrainians want to be part of Russia?
Sorry?
Do Ukrainians want to be part of Russia?
I think the vast majority of Ukrainians, especially reinforced by Putin's brutal invasion, want to be a part of a sovereign, independent Ukraine. That's why they've fought with such bravery and valor with our support, which has been incredibly important and remains incredibly important to their success.
Dr. Burns, if there was support in Ukraine for Russia, wouldn't we have during this conflict seen an insurgency, some uprising of individuals who were carrying the cause of Russia? And we've not seen that in Ukraine, have we?
No, what you've seen is incredible bravery and valor, as I said before, on the part of Ukrainians, which have demonstrated their commitment to a sovereign, independent, democratic Ukraine.
In the areas where Russia has taken Ukraine territory, has there been peace? Are the people there safe? How is Russia treating Ukrainians once they incorporate a territory?
They're treating them as second-class citizens with a fair amount of repression as well. Just like I would add, they treat many of their own citizens.
Director Burns, tell us of some of the war crimes that have occurred against Ukrainian people.
Oh, I think, one of the most vicious of those crimes has been the illegal transportation and abduction, in effect, of Ukrainian children. I think that's the one that, I think strikes at all of our hearts as well.
If this was about NATO, Director Burns, would Putin be kidnapping children in Ukraine?
No, as I said, I don't think this is just about NATO. It's about that wider fixation that Putin has about subjugating Ukraine.
Director Haynes, tell us what, in your review of the intelligence and your experience, what is this conflict about?
Oh, I think Director Burns stated it well. It's certainly about the subjugation of Ukraine, but also, one of the things that's very consistent with that Putin talks about is that he believes that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century is the breakdown of the Soviet Union. He perceives that they lost a tremendous amount in that context, and I think does not want to be the leader that loses even further influence over those states that were a part of the Soviet Union, and in fact wants to bring it back to its former glory. And I think the other aspect of this that is behind, the importance of our continuing to support Ukraine in their extraordinarily courageous acts in countering Russia is that China is also watching what's happening here. And I think that's one of those scenarios where if China sees that we're able, and we already overexceeded, I think, their expectations in terms of coming together with Europe and actually countering Russia in this scenario. But if they see that weaken, that resolve weaken, and our inability to maintain assistance, that is going to be a lesson that they're going to learn for the future for their own assertive efforts in their region.
Director Haynes, tomorrow, if Ukraine or NATO or the United States said no NATO for Ukraine, would this be over?
No.
Director Burns, we have unfortunately taken a significant amount of time for Congress to act for Ukraine aid to be approved. We have stood by Ukraine. We have provided the weapons that they have needed, that they have fought. We have not fought. They have fought to counter Russian aggression with great loss. What is our delay costing now? What is happening on the battlefield? And is Ukraine at a disadvantage because we have not approved aid?
Yes is the short answer. I came back a couple of weeks ago from my 10th visit to Ukraine during the course of the war, and in conversations not just with President Zelensky, but with our intelligence counterparts and Ukrainian military officers. I was struck by several things. First, Ukraine is not running out of courage and tenacity. They're running out of ammunition, and we're running out of time to help them. I was briefed on the Battle of Avdiivka, which caused a rushed withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces about 2 days before I arrived in Kyiv. And one of the senior Ukrainian partners who was in the battle told me that our men fought as long and hard as they could, but we ran out of ammunition. And the Russians just kept coming. And what I worry about in 24 without supplemental assistance is that you're going to see more Avdiivkas, that Ukraine is going to lose more ground, notwithstanding their courage and tenacity, and maybe significant ground over time. And as Director Haynes said, I think that has consequences for American interests that go well beyond Ukraine and European security. They go directly to our interests in the Indo-Pacific. I think they're likely to that kind of an outcome will stoke the ambitions of the Chinese leadership, and they're going to undermine the faith that our partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific have in our reliability as well. With supplemental assistance, however, I think it is possible to cement a strategic success for Ukraine, for the West, and a strategic loss for Vladimir Putin, to defeat him in his goal of subjugating Ukraine and controlling its choices, to put Ukraine in a position where by the end of 2024, it can regain the initiative on the ground, but even more importantly, negotiate from a position of relative strength with Putin's Russia. I don't think Putin is serious today about negotiating. He may be interested in the theater of negotiations, but he's not interested in compromise. He's interested in negotiations where he can dictate the terms. Without supplemental assistance, I think that's the future that Ukrainians could face a year from now with supplemental assistance. I think it's possible to puncture his arrogance, his confidence that time is on his side, and put Ukrainians in the position where they could negotiate an outcome from a position of relative strength, an outcome in which, as I said, Putin's goal is defeated. Ukraine remains a sovereign, independent state, anchored in Western institutions, and has the time and the security to recover, while Russia has to live with the long-term consequences of Putin's foolish and brutish invasion of Ukraine.
Last question, Director Burns, Director Haynes. There are people in Congress who support aid for Ukraine, but believe, I believe mistakenly, that we have time, that this is not at a critical juncture, that we can take our time in approving this aid. Director Burns, Director Haynes, are they mistaken?
I think, as I said before, Mr. Chairman, the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. I saw that in the description of what happened in Avdiivka. They're running out of munitions for both air defense and for artillery. You know, one of the Ukrainian brigades that fought at Avdiivka, I was told, in the 2 days before they were forced to withdraw, had a grand total of 15 155 artillery munitions per day for the entire brigade of something like 2,500 personnel. Another brigade had a grand total of 42 mortar rounds for the entire brigade at the end of that. It's not that they didn't fight with courage and tenacity, it's that they ran out of ammunition. You can already see the Ukrainian military rationing ammunition. You can already see them becoming more vulnerable to Russian attacks from the air, from drones, from missiles, from aircraft. And that's the future we're going to see, I think, without providing them the munitions that they've used so effectively in the past, and which I believe are the key to a serious negotiation down the road.
Dr. Haynes?
No, I have nothing more to add to that. I mean, I think it is urgent.
Jim Himes.